Hey, if you were into 80s rock, this video is for you. We're doing one of my favorite things that we do on this channel is we're doing one of these magazine flip-throughs. And this is part 2. We did part 1, I don't know, a week or so back. This is from the Hit Parader fall of 1984. And we left off last time when we got to this centerfold poster of Judas Priest. All right, so let's move forward with this magazine. There's Ozzy. And this would have been... let's see here. So because this is fall 1984, this is all Bark at the Moon time period. And we did a video on him recently that I thought that asked this interesting question, like, what was it about this guy that just made him, because he's a household name even today. It's kind of amazing. And then here's Ozzy with his band. This is the band. Now this isn't the band, which, since we're just looking at pictures right now, this is not the band that was on Bark at the Moon, obviously. So this is Bob Daisley, Randy Rhoads, of course, Ozzy, and then Lee Kerslake. Bob Daisley had actually played with Rainbow, and probably you all know the story of Randy Rhoads. There's Ozzy, and then Lee Kerslake had been with a band, Uriah Heep, much earlier. Here's Pat Travers, kind of a legend. Okay, this is pretty interesting because back around this time, there was this band that came out, and it was Hagar, Schon, Aaronson, Shrieve, HSAS, and they called the album Through the Fire. And basically, it was kind of this supergroup thing, and a lot of us were expecting that it was going to, or maybe hoping, because they'd talked about it, that it would be an ongoing project, but they just put this one album out, and then that was it. And they had one really song that I absolutely loved on it called Top of the Rock. And it was pretty awesome. And then they also did the old song, Whiter Shade of Pale, Procol Harum song. And it was kind of interesting listening to their version, listening to Sammy Hagar sing it. But this was a pretty cool band. So Kenny Aaronson, it was funny when I saw the back of the record and I saw his picture, I thought, where have I seen that guy before? Well, where I'd seen him was on Billy Squier music videos. So go back, for example, and watch The Stroke. You'll see him in those music videos. And then you just see him popping up all over the place. And I think when I saw Billy Idol in 86, 87, I need to look this up just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure he was playing bass for him on that tour. It was the Whiplash Smile tour. And I love Billy Idol. But anyway, he played, so he ended up playing with so many people. He was kind of a big deal. Of course, there's Neil Schon, Sammy Hagar, and then, and this is kind of interesting, Michael Shrieve was the drummer, and he actually had played with Neil Schon in Santana. So that's how those two guys knew each other. But it was kind of an interesting thing. It wasn't long after this that Sammy goes, and I think that's when he recorded VOA, and then he's with, at that point, he's with Van Halen, and you know the rest from there. So, but they had recorded this album. I think they put on 4 shows, as I recall, and that's how they recorded this album. Okay, so Queen. This is an interesting time for them because this is when they had the album The Works out, and what was kind of important about that album was the song Radio Gaga. It ended up being a pretty big hit. And the reason that it's kind of a legendary song now, they played that one at the big Live Aid concert. And it's actually a really great tune. It's got a great melody line. It's kind of catchy. And when he sang that at that concert, just go back and watch the Live Aid thing when they played the song Radio Gaga, and just sing the entire stadium. Just kind of, I mean, it was such a great tune. And so anyway, this was all happening during that period. Saxon, I actually have several Saxon albums. I remember coming to school one day, I think I was in junior high, 7th or 8th grade, and I saw a bunch of kids coming into school one day wearing Saxon shirts because they'd been in tour the day before, opening for somebody. And the shirts were so cool. I didn't know who they were. And so I went out and I bought a few Saxon albums, and I don't know, it's cool. It just never really, it just wasn't I don't know. It just didn't speak to me the way I think it did with some people. But anyway, if you're a Saxon fan, tell me what tracks to look for, because it's one of those bands I really wanted to like. I bought some of their stuff, and it was one of those where you put the needle down and you're like, and you skip, and then you never really get back to it. Anyway, but they obviously, they were making a name for themselves, and they were popping up here and there, and so. Oh my gosh. Okay, this was such an interesting time for the band Yes. Because of course we were in the 80s, and they were old school at that point. They were one of these progressive bands that goes back into the 70s, and they'd been around for a while. And then they, like a couple other bands, they just had this resurrection right here in the early mid 80s. And they hit it so hard with this album, 90125. And one of the big changes that they had on this album was I say changes, and it's kind of funny because that was one of the big hit songs off of this album, was they added a guy named Trevor Rabin. And Trevor Rabin was this kind of a pioneering guitar player. If you remember the song "Owner of a Lonely Heart," it was a monster hit. And part of the thing that made it interesting was the sounds that were used, and so many of these things were generated on a guitar synthesizer. And he was one of the first people to really take that concept of these alternate sounds and guitar synthesizers into the mainstream in a sense. I don't know that they ever got really caught on that big. I mean, I think Judas Priest was experimenting with them when they got to Turbo, but anyway, he brought this new energy into this band, into Yes, Trevor Rabin did. He ended up being such a big deal. And they had so many, this was Owner of a Lonely Heart. It had a song called It Can Happen, which was just so cool. The production on this album, 90125, was just spectacular. They had another hit song called Leave It, which was a pretty cool tune, and then another one called Hold On. Anyway, it was an excellent album. And it was not traditional Yes. I have a bunch of Yes albums, and again, they were kind of this progressive band, but with Steve Howe leaving, Steve Howe was the guitarist through all the big Yes stuff. Steve Howe had moved on, and he joined the band Asia, as you know. And so then they brought in this new guy, Trevor Rabin. And then Trevor went from there and then kind of made a name for himself in a lot of other places. Believe it or not, also, if you didn't know this, you probably do if you're listening to this, but he movie soundtracks. And so even if you think maybe you've never heard Trevor Rabin before, because maybe you don't know much about Yes, well, you have probably if you ever saw, for example, the movie National Treasure. Now, that's not, he did dozens and dozens of movies. I just know that was one of the real blockbusters that he did the soundtrack. Anyway, this version of the band Yes was just huge. It just exploded onto the scene when they hit there in the mid 80s. So then John Cougar Mellencamp. Let's see, what do we have next? Oh yeah, and then we have, of course, Van Halen. And who was bigger in 1984 than Van Halen? Of course, the big album 1984, of course, was released this year, and then they toured, and they were really as big as they had ever been. And then it wasn't long after that they, you know the story. David Lee Roth ends up leaving the band. Sammy Hagar joins, which we already talked about. And anyway, and who knows what would have happened if David Lee Roth would not have done that. And then here's Eddie Van Halen. And this is where he's actually playing the thing that kind of famously known as his Frankenstrat. This is it right here. And then, okay, song index. What is this? Oh, so what we have here on the next pages are a bunch of songs and their lyrics. Of course, there's Billy Idol, Kevin DuBrow, Joe Elliott from Def Leppard. And here's all the song lyrics coming up in the next few pages. Never Give Up, Sammy Hagar song. And here's Rock of Ages by Def Leppard. This, of course, was on Pyromania. And Robert John Mutt Lang. I think we had a video about him and Def Leppard recently, but he was just a world famous producer, worked with AC/DC before this, and of course he worked on High and Dry, Pyromania, and anyway, just part of the sound that Def Leppard became was largely due to Mutt Lange. Mental Health. This is of course Quiet Riot. Not Now John. That's Pink Floyd. Cuts Like a Knife. Man, I remember I used to love Bryan Adams. I thought he was so amazing. White Wedding. Billy Idol. That was obviously a pretty big hit. Sitting at the Wheel, Moody. It was also interesting how the Moody Blues. Speaking of Yes, and these old bands. I mean, Moody Blues was an old progressive band from way back at this point, and it was interesting how they somehow managed to. I say stay relevant. I mean, I guess they were, the fact that they're showing up in Hit Parade or magazine, but I don't know that they'd really done anything, because I think it was the next year that they had the song Wildest Dreams, which is kind of a cool song, but they just somehow just kind of hung around, and you just hear about them. And and maybe there's things that I'm missing here, where they had hits in the early 80s, but I couldn't. I'm sitting here right now, and I have a bunch of Moody Blues albums. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what that song was. I have no idea. I just look at this. I know John Lodge is Moody Blues, and so I don't know. Kind of interesting. Gun for Hire. This was on Flick of the Switch. It was actually a pretty rockin', pretty brutal guitar tones. Classic AC/DC. Love Is a Battlefield. Pat Benatar. Of course, those old music videos of her, especially this one, it was so dark. I was talking to somebody about this a couple of days ago, how great she was. And you'd see her stuff, especially Love Is a Battlefield on MTV. And man, it was just, the imagery in that thing was so cool. And then the dancing at the end, it was pretty neat. Beat It by Michael Jackson. Speaking of Van Halen breaking up, I'm sure everybody already knows this story, so I won't go into it. But this was Eddie Van Halen and Michael Jackson, and the song Beat It. That was one of the things that kind of put a crack in the foundation of Van Halen when he went and played that guitar solo. Anyway, that's a whole nother story to get into, but kind of interesting. Rick Springfield. I actually always liked Rick Springfield. Affair of the Heart. It was all very poppy music, but I actually kind of dug the guy. New Year's Day. Boy, that song is such a quintessential U2 masterpiece. I'm a U2 fan for sure. I have when I didn't really figure them out until Joshua Tree, and as soon as I got that and I heard the opening stuff of that first song, Where the Streets Have No Name, instantly I rewound and started buying everything that they'd ever put out. And I did. I mean, I started going back and bought it all. And it was funny because I was kind of a rocker metalhead in school. And so I always kind of dismissed U2. And then once my eyes were opened and I saw just how spectacular and interesting their music was, and I just, anyway, I became a big fan. And of course, this is off of the album War. And that was a pivotal album for those guys. They weren't, we look back at them now and we think, man, they're the biggest, they're so huge, they could probably fill a stadium right now. Well, back when they were touring on the album War, which is what this song was from, Sunday Bloody Sunday was on that one. They were not sure that they were going to go any further than that, because they just weren't really moving. But this video ended up being a huge deal on MTV. And then by the next album, they were just, that's the one where you have Pride in the Name of Love. In the name of love, one more in the name of love. That was on Unforgettable Fire, which was after that album. And then Joshua Tree was after that. If you're a U2 fan, I'd be curious to hear what your favorite album is, because they just kept getting, in my opinion, unlike a lot of bands, they just kept getting better. But for me, the best thing that they ever did was Unforgettable Fire. That just front to back, top to bottom was so spectacular. And I'd be curious, if you're a U2 fan, which of those albums was the one that's kind of a go-to for you, that more fully encapsulated just all the stuff that they could do, and how great their songwriting and lyrics. I loved U2. Okay, here's Livewire, Motley Crue, of course written by Nikki Sixx. This is on their first album, Too Fast for Love, and for my money, it still might be the best song and best recording they ever put out. I know a lot of people would argue with me with that, but it's so hard to beat that opening guitar riff and the energy in that song, and also the imperfection in it, which is something that we forget sometimes, how important imperfection is. I was listening to Ted Templeman's audiobook recently, and he even was talking about that, how sometimes little accidents, and he was pointing some of them out in different in his book, in different songs, how these little accidents somehow add something to the song that you don't want to fix. You need to leave it that way. And there's a point when Vince Neil, when he hits this really, really high note on there, and he's a little pitchy on it. You know, he's kind of in and out of tune. He's not really, but somehow it's just awesome. And so, and the guitar tone is so great. Anyway, it's a great song. Send Her My Love, of course, Frontiers. And by this point, when Frontiers was out with Journey, Steve Perry he and Jonathan Cain, because what they had pulled off with Escape, they were in the process of taking over the album. I did a video on Frontiers not long ago, and we're going to go more into that because it's such an interesting period for the band Journey, as they were kind of falling apart, really, which is so unfortunate. China Girl, David Bowie. That was a cool song written by Iggy Pop and David Bowie. Saved by Zero. Oh my gosh. This is on the album Reach the Beach by the Fixx. And that record is so, I can't say that I love every song on the record, but the good songs are so good. It's the album that has Sign of Fire. It's the album that has One Thing Leads to Another. And then of course, Saved by Zero. And all those were big hits. And the production on that album is so good. And partly because when you listen to those songs, there's space in them. Like the instruments are so nicely separated that it's, I don't know how I describe this somehow, but it's the kind of music that you feel like you can get inside of because there's room for you. There's so many songs and music that it's like a wall. And it's just, you know, and you feel it may be a good song, but you can't really immerse yourself into it because it's just this big block of mud in front of you. And this was done so well. Put some headphones on. If you haven't listened to this in a while, go bust this out. It was so spectacular. Human Touch, another Rick Springfield song. That was actually a cool tune. World of Fantasy. This was on the album Never Surrender by Triumph. I think I've done a Triumph video on this channel before. I used to love Triumph. Had pretty much all their stuff in the 80s. I know absolutely nothing about this. So wrong. I don't have a clue. If you have a clue or think it's worth talking about, say something in the notes because I don't have a clue. Give Me All Your Love, and of course, huge hit, ZZ Top. My Town also, again, I know nothing about this. I don't remember it. Another song by Def Leppard off of Pyromania. Huge, big song. This is, if not the best song on that album, it's pretty close to the best song on that album. And then Photograph, another one off of that album. And of course, there's Def Leppard. If Anyone Falls, Stevie Nicks, oh boy, she was awesome. It's interesting that when Lindsey Buckingham joined Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks was his girlfriend. And he says, I'll join Fleetwood Mac, but because of course, Peter Green had left the band. And he was kind of the songwriter, guitarist, singer guy. He'd left the group. And so then they're replacing him. They find this guy, Lindsey Buckingham, who's not really very well known. And he says, I'll join Fleetwood Mac, but you got to bring my girlfriend and have her in the band too. And that was Stevie Nicks. And then just the impact that she went on to have on popular culture, on music. She was just this unbelievable songwriter. Just so good. I mean, because she was writing a lot of the stuff there in Fleetwood Mac, but then she goes off and puts that solo stuff out. I think her first album was the Belladonna, and that's the one that says The Edge of 17. How do you beat that song? And there were just a bunch of great tunes on that album. And then I think this was the follow-up album. And again, just great stuff. She was so good, and she had that unique voice and this she just was an amazing songwriter. So it was kind of funny because she was an afterthought for joining Fleetwood Mac. And then she goes on and becomes this legendary songwriter, singer, stage presence, pop culture figure. Just anyway, kind of an amazing thing when you look back at that. If you love rock and roll, here it is. I think these are, when it says song hits, like maybe these are words to over 110 songs. Okay, that's interesting. Just a bunch of lyrics in magazines. And here you go. You can order them. That's great. Here's After the Fall, another Journey song. I don't know anything about Golden Chains by Taxi. No clue. Subscribe to Smash Hits. This looks like interviews, features, photos, words to more than 60 songs. This is, I guess you buy these things and they have song lyrics in them. Just, I guess, another type of magazine. I just blew right past something that was kind of funny. And when I saw it, I meant to say something and then I didn't say it. And it's right there. You remember this? You remember him from Dallas? That's so crazy to see that. I'm no more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm not my old lovable self. I remember Dallas coming on what was it, Friday night? It was my gosh, that was such a famous show. Photo IDs, rock music books. These advertisements are actually so interesting, and I was just blown right past them. Anyway, I saw that and I meant to mention it because it's so funny thinking about that. All right, so King of Pain by The Police. They were huge. That was a huge, huge hit. I saved $841 on this guitar. This is a BC Rich. Now look what your membership will bring. What is this? Musicians Buying Service is a totally new concept created by musicians for musicians. First time you can take advantage of volume pricing. Buy like the pros. Bunch of guitar pedals. Looks like some sort of you've got a Les Paul there. Okay, Sharp Dressed Man, ZZ Top, huge hit. All the Way, Triumph. This was on Never Surrender. I actually liked that album. Some of the songs were pretty good. I don't think it was their best album, but I was a Triumph fan. Song hits. Look at all these. Yeah, you've got, Joe Walsh right there. The Police again. How interesting. Men at Work. Joan Jett. Boy, this is Loverboy. Loverboy. There's Loverboy there. They had some. I hate to admit it, they had some cool tunes. The music was a lot of fun, and I have some of their stuff. And I remember I bought Lovin' Every Minute of It, that album, and it wasn't great, but they had some cool tunes, so I always kind of liked them. Every Breath You Take. There's another Police song that was obviously huge hit. Here's another Smash Hits back copies. In case you missed them the original time, you can get these back copies of more Loverboy, Boy George, Simon Le Bon, Phil Collins. Oh, and there's Paul Stanley, of course, from Kiss. Okay, now we have Owner of a Lonely Heart by Yes, and that's the same picture that we were looking at earlier in this magazine. It's funny because I look at this and I go, wait a minute, weren't we just looking at this? That is the same picture we were looking at. And this is Owner of a Lonely Heart, humongous, monster hit, and had all those really cool guitar tones from Trevor Rabin. Such a cool song. And it was a departure from what we had known as Yes back in the 70s. It was kind of a new version, an 80s version of Yes. And they had some good stuff. This album, 90125, was huge. And it had a bunch of really, really good music on it. And the production, by the way, on that album, I think it was It Can Happen. If you haven't listened to it in a while, go back and listen to the song It Can Happen by Yes. Throw some headphones on. It is one of those songs that it's hard to imagine how a production of a song can get any better. It sounds so good. And the way the song's organized is excellent. It was just such a good album. Smiles Left Your Eyes. Interesting that this is next to it because Asia, of course, was built on partly Steve Howe, who was the guitarist for Yes originally. And then he and John Wetton, they put together a supergroup. And this song, The Smile Has Left Your Eyes, was actually on their second album called Alpha. Alpha was a bit of a disappointment for everybody. The first album, Asia, my opinion, one of the best albums to be released that year. And it was one of the great albums of the 80s, honestly. It was a supergroup. And just, I personally, I don't think there was a single song on there that I didn't like. And I saw them on that tour. I was young, But even remember moments during that concert, just being, I saw it at Red Rocks, just the whole experience, that music at Red Rocks at night, clear sky, man, it was just so good. But then the second album, Alpha, they rushed it. This was kind of an okay song, but the album did not do nearly as well as the first one. And most people you talk to, including band members, will tell you it was kind of, we rushed it out and we weren't really happy with the whole thing and whatever. Okay, Michael Schenker. Michael Schenker is such an interesting character in the history of rock because, of course, his brother is Rudolf Schenker from the Scorpions. And he actually played in the Scorpions, of course, for a short period of time, early on. And he also played with UFO. And then he went on and created the Michael Schenker Group. And the Michael Schenker Group, I actually have several of their albums. And this would have been right around the time of Built to Destroy. And I listen to these records and I like them, but there's nothing, to be honest, there's just nothing on there that's like, yeah, I got to go back and listen to that tune. The stuff was good. It was really good, solid music. That's why I kept buying it. And as a matter of fact, when he came out with Macaulay Schenker Group, it was still MSG. I bought that too, and it was pretty good. It wasn't, but it was just. And I actually went and saw them play a small show in Denver one afternoon and met him, shook his hand and said hi. But I've always liked him. He plays this kind of black and white flying V. And it's funny because MSG, all of us, we'd see that logo, the MSG logo. And I remember the first time I was a young guy and I was walking into a restaurant and there was a big sign that says no MSG. And I thought, first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is no Michael Schenker Group. And anyway, so now forever, for the rest of my life, every time I walk into a restaurant and I see no MSG, I'm reminded of the Michael Schenker Group. Okay, Quiet Riot. Here we have, this would have been, since it's 1984, this would have been Condition Critical time. The album Condition Critical was an attempt to have lightning strike twice because it was kind of like Metal Health Part 2. I bought it. I didn't love it. I always liked Quiet Riot, but I don't know. It just didn't do it much for me. It was kind of like they were trying to copy Metal Health again. And it was just one of those where you skip the tracks. And I mean, they even did a Slade song on it, just like they did on the Metal Health. And it just, I didn't love it, but they were huge. They made such an impact. And of course, it says here, Kevin DuBrow tells about success, failure, and Randy Rhoads. Of course, Randy Rhoads, he and Kevin DuBrow had actually started this band back in the 1970s. And so Quiet Riot had put 2 albums out. And then Randy Rhoads, of course, was then recruited to go play with Ozzy Osbourne and then was on Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. And anyway, and it actually says, so we have, let's see, Rudy Sarzo there, Carlos Cavazo, Kevin DuBrow in concert. I saw him in concert opening for the Scorpions. They're pretty cool. This I've never been too keen on flying, but what happened to Randy Rhoads only reinforced my fears. Yeah, in case you didn't know, and you probably do since you're listening to this, but on March 19th of 1982, Randy Rhoads, who I was just talking about, who formed Quiet Riot and then went on to play with Ozzy, died in a small plane crash March 19th of 1982 while he was on tour with Ozzy. And it's a whole story behind that. So here you can order back copies of Hit Parader, Motley Crue, Judas Priest, Def Leppard, more Judas Priest, Eddie Van Halen, Ozzy, all there for $2 a copy. All your back orders. How funny is that? It's so interesting. And then here's on the back page. I remember seeing this advertisement from Craig Chiquico all the time. He was with Jefferson Starship. He wasn't originally with Jefferson Starship. But anyway, I'd see this advertisement. I remember seeing this thing in so many different magazines with him selling Carvin stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoy that. I actually really enjoy going back through these things. We got more of these. We got a whole pile of these things we're going to be going through, but I hope you enjoy this. Please, if you're not already following the channel, please follow the channel. Like the video. Love to get your feedback on any of this stuff. If I got something wrong, also tell me. With that, have yourself a fantastic day.